being aware that a good leader puts everybody else ahead of them, it shows that you need humility to become a great leader. Once you're humble, then you are open enough to keep on learning and realizing that you don't have all the answers, so that you can actually grow yourself to serve better, right? Because a leader is somebody that is serving their people, is serving their, is serving the section of the business that you're running. Welcome to the Leaders in Technology podcast. I am your host, David Mancella. As the audience know by now, I created this podcast to honor the leaders that are changing this world for a better place, specifically by managing technology teams and by having that bridge between technology and business so we can all prosper and have a better future. And today, we have a great example of one of those leaders. Tony, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm not sure I can fit that description, but now you raise the expectations from everybody that I'll have to figure out what to do.
Of course you do, Tony. Please, for the audience, can you tell me your full name? What do you do for a living and where do you live?
Tony Ambrozie. I've been doing technology and digital for many years. I live in Orlando, Florida, literally at the very edge, my south fence is Walt Disney World fence, and I am the Chief Digital and Information Officer for Baptist Health South Florida. They're in the South Florida area, but so that's in short what I do. I try to solve problems. I try to build great experiences because I want myself as a consumer great experiences from others.
That's fantastic. Having a career so successful requires a lot of effort and strategic planning and being a leader of your own self. So I would love to take you into a tunnel back in time. What was in your mind when you were about to finish high school?
I don't know, it's strange, but I always wanted to do great things, meaningful things. I don't know if I wanted to be president or prime minister or king or whatever. Not that I could have, but I wanted to do meaningful things. And so I can look back and say, yeah, that was good. I didn't just clock time. I built things for people, and they're better off because of what I did or what I do. I think that's basically what it was. I didn't quite know where would that happen and how would that happen. That's where we were talking about strategic planning. That was my planning. I wanted to do those things, and then as life kind of comes in front of you, then you select from all the options those that fit that more of a vision rather than strategy. And you say, yeah, that kind of fits the vision. Let me go and do that.
You know how blessed you are that at such a young age, you already had this vision of what you wanted to do in your life and what you wanted to accomplish. Most people, they are like, I don't know. So they end up in college in their own career if they are lucky enough to get into college, right?
Yeah, and obviously, I think the trick is with what I tell my sons, they're 20 and 22, is be open to what the world can offer at any time. You never know. Have that vision of vision or principles of how do you want to live your life, and how to make things better for others, and then see what happens. So I don't believe in a very long-term planning necessarily, and they're like, tomorrow I'm going to be director, and in 5 years I'm going to be VP, and that's for sure. I don't believe in that. I do measure really my career through the things I want to do. I want to build, let's say I came in a new job, I wanted to build a strong team, and I wanted to grow leaders. I wanted to build some digital systems. That's how I measure this is what I do in the next 3 years versus anything else.
That's beautiful. Did you ever go to college for computer science, or what did you take in college?
It was engineering. But then I did get distracted by computers, and I never stopped. And I was doing my master, bachelor and master, one after the other. And that year, I decided that, hey, there's a lot of opportunity. Let me go and start my own startup, building software. And I kind of had to take a semester off to start my company. My parents weren't particularly happy about that, especially that I said, look, I want to be the next Microsoft. This is the lunacy of a 20-something-year-old. And they said, didn't Bill Gates also dropped out of school? So that wasn't a good indication, but I wanted to do that. It was a great experience. The things that I learned, and later I have to relearn or rediscover later with a level of formalism in my subsequent career about how you build things, how you create digital products, how you focus on the consumers. I talk about this at length in my upcoming book that I mentioned to you when we talked earlier a few months ago. I tell the story there, and I say, look, I made all the mistakes I'm telling you in the rest of the book, because there's a chapter about this little history. I made all the mistakes, but I didn't have a book like this to teach me otherwise.
Yeah. You know what, though? I remember I made a very successful partnership in the middle of my business career as an entrepreneur. And, this guy told me something that is profound, that I got it validated by other people that are very, very on top of technology. And he told me, basically, for a computer scientist that wants to run a business, instead of going back to school and getting an MBA, you should use that money and make a startup and fail. Because the lessons that you're going to get during that time is going to be 10 times better than just going to school and learn it, with a textbook, if you will. And that's actually what you did and what I did too, The first thing that I do after computer science was that.
You're absolutely right. And you learn. I mean, this is where later on when I was in American Express or Disney, very successful, great companies, lots of money, frankly. I always, remember back the days of, hey, I had to. By the way, I was the CEO of my company, and my father was the chairman of my company, and my best friend was the CTO. Right there you go. And then, but there were times where number one worry was, how do you make payroll? Because not for me, but and that's a powerful way of thinking that if you carry through, you say, is this this time right now is not my money. It's a lot more money than ever. But would I spend it? Is it worth spending, even if it's not my money? With that lesson that I learned 20 years ago, is it worth spending? I think, I remember one time, my team came to me and they wanted to, I don't know, it was like $1 million for some fancy tool. And I said, this is like 15 years ago. And I said, you realize India put a satellite around the moon for only $80 million. And you want $1 million for this little tool that's shiny tool. I don't think that's worth it. So.
Yeah, because it gave you the respect of how do you earn the money and how necessary that money is to actually for the commitments for the people that are helping you create it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, you have to go through that experience of scarcity, if you will, where you wonder what you're gonna get the next paycheck for your employees. And then once you go into a corporation, then you can actually, I believe, you will move faster in your corporate career because you understand that money, you can never take money for granted, and you need to make the best out of it. Right?
And I think you're absolutely right. And I've owned, or I managed emerging technologies and innovation teams. And, people say to me, oh, you have to have a lot of money for that. And I'm like, not really. You have to have some money, but not really. And by the way, if you have too much money, then you get sloppy and you get distracted and you don't innovate. You just do something because you have the money. You have to have some, but maybe less is better, because that kind of forces you to be more effective and more efficient, more focused, more driven, being able to prioritize things and say no to a lot of things. You know, Steve Jobs said it wasn't the things that we said yes, they were important. It was the things that we said no, they were important for us to be successful.
That's incredible. What did you do after your startup?
Well, so it kind of worked well, and we had a pivot. And as I said, I wrote about this in my book, because the beginning was, this is how it started. What is cool for us to build, you know, and that, of course, people said, oh, that's cool. Yeah, anything else? Do you have anything else? Anyway, so kind of a pivoted. Of course, I didn't know that word. This is being, 30 years ago. And it was reasonably successful, but and then I went into the corporate world, and then I started learning. I mean, I one of the things, probably the one thing that maybe predicted or predicts my success, whatever it is my thirst for learning, to learn more, to, mostly by reading, and I think that's kind of like that propelled, and I wanted to learn about all sorts of things. If they're interesting, I wanted to learn, even if maybe they're not necessarily directly related to what I'm doing. I'm still once in a while, get a book on some new language, programming language, and say, let me see, is there any chance that I would ever do that for a living? Probably not. But hey, this is interesting, and it's interesting how they solve this problem. It just keeps the mind running, and I think the mental muscles stretching. And so, corporate world, a British group in Europe. Then I decided, hey, maybe I do need an MBA so I can understand how big companies function.
Yeah.
Right. And then, I did my MBA and a dual degree, and then I started working for American Express, and that was a great thing.
Right after your MBA, and that's another
MBA.
That's another great point that you have. I will never say no to education. What my business partner was telling me back then is, for a computer scientist to run their own business, instead of getting an MBA, you have to actually run a startup. That doesn't mean that you don't go get an MBA if you want to work in corporate, because that's exactly what they're looking for, because they're teaching what you're gonna need at your job. Right?
That's exactly right. But remembering all those lessons from the startup world, I think that was important. So American Express, doing technology, doing digital, all sorts of things, and then at some point, we've done a great work there. When I say we, a bunch of us, and we said about 2012, we said, okay, we're 2012, 2013, we're kind of in a good shape here. We did this transformation, and what's next? And so that next was Disney. Now, fast forward another 7 years or whatever it is, and the same thing. We've done a good transformation here. Not just me, but a number of us. Now, what's next? And that next was healthcare. Because I thought, hey, it has to be a way that I could help with digital for patients in healthcare, because boy, the experiences are not great. And
right.
I don't know. You're in Canada, right? You live in Canada, and I don't know if that's much different than the US, but most places have not great digital experiences. So I thought, surely I've learned enough, and I know enough to be able to help there. So you can see the pattern of doing things, and at some point saying, okay, the trains are on track and they're going well. Where is the next adrenaline rush for me? Very nice.
That's beautiful. What was the first time in your career where you were given the responsibility to be a leader, to have people under you?
Well, I guess a startup, because it was like I thought about, hey, we need to start something. I wanted to start something, and I had a couple of other folks basically working for me and working with me. But then going into the corporate world, I started to get manager level and director level, and but again, it wasn't just a matter of administering. I wasn't a man administrator or just running the production line. It was always, hey, how do we build these great things? How do we change them? How do we, it was always about something great. And so, I guess I started from having 2 people to having 2,000 people at some point, according to me. Now, that was an interesting thing, because I also always wanted to, for whatever reason, I wanted to become a great leader. And that by itself is a crazy thing, because leadership is probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've done technology and I've done business, and it's just one of the hardest, it's just because it's driven by people and with people, and also is, you have to put everybody else ahead of you when you're the leader. And I'm still working on it, by the way. So I don't think I'm gonna ever not have to work at it. But no.
That's another profound lesson here. I'm so happy that we're doing this interview. Being aware that a good leader puts everybody else ahead of them, it shows that you need humility to become a great leader. Once you're humble, then you are open enough to keep on learning and realizing that you don't have all the answers, so that you can actually grow yourself to serve better, right? Because a leader is somebody that is serving their people, is serving their, is serving the section of the business that you're running, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you don't know, of course you don't know all the answers. Nobody does. But frankly, there are times that you don't even know the questions to ask, right? And then that's where you yourself have to learn to be able to build a vision and a strategy in your head, to be able to start asking questions and evaluating answers. So it's been an interesting journey. And by the way, there's a lot of responsibility. Look, especially when somehow who you are as a leader or what you say as a leader attracts people to your cause, because it's always a cause. Nobody, I think I said this before in an interview. I said, you're not a leader, unless people follow you. You just walk on the street. That's all you do. You're not a leader. People follow you for what that vision or the mission or whatever you want to call it. We want to accomplish that, and people say, yeah, we want to be with them. But that has a lot of responsibility, because people trust you, maybe sometimes too much, and you may lead them off the cliff. And then that's a terrible responsibility, or a terrible thing to do, because it's always your fault, not theirs.
Wow. Because I didn't know that, I almost got my company bankrupt. Because I always thought that when something went wrong, it was their fault, not mine. So I was always trying to remove the responsibility from my decisions and my actions. And that's the fastest way that you can actually go bankrupt in anything that you're doing. It doesn't have to be a business. The minute that I realized that I was the problem, that I was responsible, everything started changing and I started prospering.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I had this experience once, many years ago, and something didn't work. It was very transformational, supposed to be very transformational, and a lot of people put their confidence in what I was saying, and it didn't work in the end. Now, this is the sign of a great company. American Express said, okay, go and fix it. You didn't work. You understand why it didn't work, and what you had to do or should do. Go and fix it. That was, and then always it's you don't have to, you can't be always pulled back or kept back by what could go wrong, but you always have to be prepared and think through, because things will go wrong. And you have to be able to at regular intervals to evaluate if you're still on the right path, or you may need to make corrections and adjustments all the time. And sometimes you say, you know what, I was wrong. This is not the right way. Let's go back 3 steps and then take another turn somewhere else. Yes.
And that's fine, because that's another thing, right? If you are actually, number one, you can never manage something that you don't measure. And number two, you have to be humble enough to know that you made mistakes, and you need to have a quick action of correction before the mistake becomes a huge problem.
Correct.
Right?
That I think you're right. That's the if there's a secret, or maybe the multiple secrets, this is one, which is you always have to evaluate. Everybody makes mistakes. Everything, there's there's something that doesn't work well anywhere. You took all the greatest leaders in the world, which I'm not like them, and they all made mistakes. They became great leaders because they, first of all, they detected their misstep, and they take corrective action before it became a disaster, and then they would be remembered as a disaster leader, not as a great leader.
You know what I found that one of the things that you mentioned, in order to become a great leader, you need to have this spirit of innovation. And I think that's one of the main differences between just a manager and a great leader. A manager just runs the administration of something, right? And make sure everything
and
is
not
running.
that is not important, by the way. It's very important.
Right.
Whatever we're changing the world, we may change the world, but today, the trains need to run on time, and then there's a manager there that needs to make sure that's the case. Absolutely, but two different things.
They have the position, right? Yeah, mm-hmm. It's required, it's needed. That role is needed. But we're talking about the leaders in technology, so it's leadership what I'm interested about, right? And the biggest difference is that a leader has a vision. A leader wants to innovate. He wants to make things better. You told me 3 times, right? I went to this organization. We created something beautiful. It was time to do it again on this day, and then now you're doing it on healthcare. So you're actually looking for the next challenge in order to make this world a better place. That's great leadership, and that's what attracts people to follow you, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think all humans, maybe there's a lot of noise in our day-to-day lives, whatever it is, the commute, the traffic, a business meeting, whatever it is, there's a lot of noise, but fundamentally, you have to step back. And I think most people want to do meaningful things with their lives. I don't know if anybody, at the very end says, I made money, I paid, I built a house, or I bought a house, I bought cars, I was, versus, hey, my father was a doctor, by the way, a surgeon, and that by itself, means a lot, because it's about saving lives. And, the second part of his career, he became an eye surgeon. So he was giving people back their eyesight. This is important, right? He also built 2 or 3 hospitals, because he was great at leading and managing, by the way. I think that's how he measured his life. And I told him, I said, he's no longer with us, unfortunately, but I told him, I said, I admire you immensely. And maybe it's because of him I wanted to be a great leader, because I think he was a great leader. And he measured his life that way versus how big the house or how expensive the car or whatever it is. And I think, he's ahead of me in that respect.
True, right? it's true, like falling into the pride trap, right? We're going back to this, humbleness versus pride. If you fall into the pride trap, there is no end for you. How high can you go? Because you will never get fulfilled. And that's what we're talking about, really, right? The fulfillment in your heart is when you try to make something better for everybody, not because you want to get a 10,000 square foot mansion and a Bentley. Nothing wrong with those things, but it shouldn't be the purpose of your life.
It shouldn't, and I don't know that they would change my life in a better way anyway. So, but you're right. You're right. It needs to be meaningful as much as possible. Yes, all of us have to, put food on the table and a roof over our head, and then get kids as well, positioned in life. But they're bigger things.
What would you recommend to somebody that currently is having an engineering role or a business analysis role, and they really want to break into leadership? What would you tell somebody like that? If somebody came to your office saying, Tony, how can I actually break through into a leadership position in my organization?
I think my first question would be, do you really want to do that? Do you understand what it means? That, I was a very successful software architect, software developer, but that's not necessarily, the prediction to be a good leader or a decent leader at all. And so I would ask them, what do you want to get out of it? Bigger salary and bigger title? If you're very good at technology, probably you have a path that gets you to bigger salary and bigger title, expert architect, distinguished engineer, and all these, software companies have these roles. They're very well paid and they're very well respected. Maybe that's the path to you. If that's not what drives you, are you ready to put the effort and be frustrated with yourself 100 times a day in order to be that? And what do you want to do? Do you care for making things better, or I keep saying, making the world a better place? Obviously, I don't know if any of us does that, but making a place a better place, making an organization a better place, helping people, is that what drives you? And that's what I would say to them. Are you sure?
Yeah.
No, people, and in the past they've said over the years, "Oh, we want to be like you," and I said, "Do you understand the cost of being me?" Right? And are you willing to, or being like me, or being like somebody like me? Are you willing to pay that price, that cost? And you think it's worth paying that price? So.
Of course, and that's what people don't realize, especially people that they are trying to go into leadership for their own reasons, maybe for the reputation or the material gains that you may get from it. But when you are in a leadership position, there's many sacrifices that need to be made. For sure, being responsible for a team, for example, I don't know how it was with you, but the first time that I had to lay off people, it was the hardest thing in the world. When I realized, okay, 20 people need to go and all of them are good. It's just that the economy is not doing great and I need to let 20 people go. Like, how do you do that? And how do you sleep at night doing that, right?
Yeah, and I think it's even more. This is the interesting thing is, even when things are good, you have to think, are you giving this person working for you and your team the right guidance to be successful in a way that maybe one day they're not going to be surprised when, a reduction in force happens. And they'll say, why me? And you would say, well, you're not doing this, you don't know that, you haven't. And they would say, but you have not told me that. You have not taught me that. Why? It was your job, figuratively speaking. So that's something that to keep in mind, that is, you have that everybody has a responsibility for their own career, but you have the responsibility to be a teacher and a mentor to your people, at least the direct reports, if not more. So they're not surprised and they grow. I've seen in my career plenty of leaders who never provided that guidance or teaching or mentoring, and then one day, the guillotine fell. I'm like, that cannot be. Just, nobody should be surprised when these things happen. So.
That's incredible. Who was the first person that gave you that opportunity to become a position where you had substantial amount of people working for you? How did that happen when you realize, oh my God, now I have 1,000 people under me?
Well, I think it was because, again, not because of my technical skills, but because I've proven that I could lead organizations, and I could lead increasingly large organizations. You start with, 5 people, and at some point it's 50, and it still works well, and it's not the 50 or the 150 is not just a bloat where people just waft around, but it's a well-disciplined force to change things in a way that, a lot of times, people working for me, when they're introducing themselves elsewhere, they say, I work for Tony. And I always thought that was embarrassing, because I'm not like the guy in North Korea, right? But it was a brand, not of my brand, but the brand of the organization that says, we are like that. This is what it means, we are like that. But increasingly large organizations, by showing that I could lead them, I could have a vision. I always had a vision for what we wanted to do and who we wanted to be, and then a strategy. The strategy is like, what are we going to do and what we're not going to do in order to meet that vision. So I think, sometimes though, it's teams, organizations get bigger and bigger. But as a former boss once told me, is small teams and small organizations can have very big problems, as big as a big organization. So that's what happened.
In a large department structure, what would you recommend? What would be, based on what your experience, how many people can have direct reports? Like what's the number of maximum people that report up to you, that you've seen efficiently, like when you don't lose efficiency anymore, right?
Yeah, I think it's because it's Jack Welch had this rule that basically said, you have to be able to have a one-on-one with your team, your direct reports every week. And the one-on-one is not a project status report meeting. And I have those. Sometimes they're informal, and we basically achieve the same thing. And otherwise, some other times it's just like Wednesday at 1, whatever it is. I think it's if you are capable of still, or if you have the time necessary to meet with them and you talk to them, and not to control them, not to tell them what they need to do, but to work with them in a one-on-one setting. That's I think that number is somewhere like 7, maybe 7. I would think that's where you stop. If you have something like 15, then it becomes very diluted. And as a leader, you have to help them grow as leaders, right? That cannot be, you can't do that with 20 people working for you. Because it's, maybe you can have 20 individual contributors. I had that when I was a lead developer, But I wasn't trying necessarily to grow them as leaders, maybe because I wasn't much of a leader myself, or maybe I was a manager. But then when you grow up, I think that the role is to help them grow, and that's an intense. It's a mentorship kind of a relationship. It does require time.
It's so glad that you had that number in mind, because I was blessed to be able to play with that. Back in 2011, we had a large project, many people in the project, and it was going very bad. So they hired our firm to fix the problem, because they were 2 years into this project, $10 million, and nothing had happened. And so I was given the keys to do whatever I wanted with the team. So I started experimenting, and that was my number, 7. I came down to the conclusion that if I had 7 people and a leader on top of 7 people, that would be ideal. I tried 15, I tried 4, I tried 20. Nothing worked as good as having 7 people under a leader.
I'm glad to hear that, but it just felt the right number. So, but yeah.
It's important when once you're in leadership to understand organizational change and organizational settings and environments. Another thing that happened to me in that project is that because the client was a large multinational importers, they were big. Basically, they had warehouse all over North America, big warehouses, and they were running this software project that they never did before. They wanted to build their own software, and so they thought they could do it internally. And they hired this CTO that was supposed to have this incredible skill set, but he was very good in the technical side, but he wasn't really good with people. So what happened is once I got there, I saw all these hundreds and hundreds of developers working in warehouses without windows, and being forced to work in an environment almost like they were building cars,
Yeah, and
I'm
by
like,
the way,
no wonder these people are not producing.
correct. But by the way, sometimes if you hire somebody like a CTO, and you say you're responsible for all the technical to manage through your people, all the technical aspects, the myriad of technical aspects for this piece of software, do they really have the time to do leadership things, alignment with stakeholders, growing their people? So, sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is probably not, even if they can do it, if they have the talent and inclination. Sometimes it's like, I don't have enough hours in the day, especially when you have a big thing in front of you, you start from scratch, and it's all about, designing and developing and testing technology, a lot of it. I would say that sometimes it's the person who put that person in that place that maybe should have thought about the role or about the structure in a bit different way.
And empowerment, because to your point, he didn't have the authority to make structural changes, right?
Oh, then that's really bad. So
they had to hire us as a consulting firm to show them this is the way you have to do it, and if you don't change this, you're going to continue to fail. But it took 2 years of failure before the executive team, were able to figure it out that they needed external help.
And frankly, right? I would say is, I have no idea what your case was other than your description, but maybe it was that person on top of this person that should have not taken 2 years, but should have maybe helped, tune and tweak the approach probably in the first 6 months. So, yeah, we may call ourselves whatever, chief something officers and VPs and SVPs, but sometimes you just need to do the, project status meetings and, get into, my son asked me, do you guys still have, sometimes system problems? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. They're still there, especially when we still have old ones. They're going to migrate to better ones or build better ones. And he said, do you get on calls with your team? And I'm like, of course, if they need me, I do. Even whatever my fancy title is, You sometimes need to do that, and that's part of being being a leader. Now, of course, if I, as my teams grew bigger, and if I got on a call, and I would say, "Hey, it's me," everybody, the junior people would just freak out. But so a lot of times would be just listening and maybe, pinging the right people. But you need to be, when you need to be involved, you need to roll the sleeves and be involved. Not always. Yeah. But leadership is not just about describing grand visions and fancy strategies.
Right. That's beautiful. What would you tell yourself if you had access to go back and look at yourself when you were 28 years old? What would you tell yourself? What advice would you give yourself?
Don't sweat the small stuff. Not everything matters. Think in a big way, big long-term way. I used to get riled up about something, like, and you're like, I can't even remember what those things were about. And in retrospect, even a week later, I wouldn't remember. And I think that's what I would say is there's a lot of stuff that is just noise. Just ignore the noise and focus on what's important, and things will if you do the right things and you work hard and you learn hard, it will get there. And the small thing is just small things. I think that's probably the number
Wonderful.
one.
That's so smart, for sure. Tony, thank you so much for your time. I want to respect it. Thank you so much for being able to be in this podcast with us. I'll finish the podcast with one last question.
Okay.
If you had access to a billboard in front of the busiest highway on earth, what would you write in it?
I think it would be a few things, but I would probably say never stop learning. Always learn. Always learn. Whether from your own experiences, they are very powerful. Just like my story with my startup, if not from people's books, like your books, interesting stuff, or others. I keep saying is like, we learn better from our own mistakes, but frankly, we don't have enough long life to learn only from our mistakes. So we need to learn from others. So, and then, it's probably that's why I said, hey, let me write a book about some of these things.
And it's one of the best things you can ever do, because you're right. This passion for learning is what's taking us here, and this is why humankind, we have evolved so much, we have grown so much. And my dad used to tell me, I will always keep on learning, and the last thing I'm going to learn is how to die.
Yeah, that's a great point.
His attitude, right?
That's a great point. Yes. Yeah.
Tony, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
If people would like to get in touch with you, ask you for more questions, where can they find you online?
I'm on, I don't do a lot of social media, but I'm on LinkedIn. I think that's probably how you found me. And I do. And so I do respond sometimes. People are asking. Now I get, unfortunately, like 1,000, requests from vendors. And I'm like, this is not what that network is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be people asking me, just as you said, hey, I heard you speaking there, what did you think about, or how did you do that? Yeah, that's what that network is about. So, but absolutely, I'm more than welcome. The thing is, when you get a question that you haven't thought about, that's a learning moment for you or for me as well, by the way. So that's the interesting thing is it doesn't work only one way. You ask me a question I haven't thought about, I will think about it. Therefore, I'm going to be growing in knowledge and maybe wisdom, and I'm going to provide you an answer. So it works both ways. Both of us are richer in an intellectual level after that question being asked. So
true. Thank you so much, Tony. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of the week.
Cheers. Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leaders in Tech podcast. Check in next week to keep learning how to use technology and leadership to change the game. See you next time.